So now, as far as security management and governance is concerned, you've done your governance bit, right? And you manage the security, right? Now, one of the most important part of managing security is to carry out risk assessments. Okay. What is the risk assessment? We started from, I started with that example of Bob and Alice living on an island and a shoreline, right? Risk assessment is basically the process of evaluating your risks and living with them, right? You have to live with the risks, whatever are there, and you have to live with it. You have to share your space with the threats in the environment and continue with your task, right? But once we come to the information security space, right, we see that risk is a factor of threat and vulnerabilities. We can also define risk as likelihood into impact. That means likelihood of a particular risk event taking place into what will be its impact. Okay, so it can be quantified in such a manner, right? That means you can give threats a certain amount of value, you can give vulnerability a certain amount of value, multiply it, and you can get a quantitative value. Similarly, you can also calculate risk by likelihood of an event and its impact in dollar value or some kind of a number, and you can get a quantitative assessment of a particular risk. Now, whenever you're trying to assess risk, right, you need to understand the threat you have in your environment. Okay, and that's why modeling a threat is very important. You have to model the threat. Okay, now once you model threat, you come to know that what is the threat to a particular asset. Okay, so for finding threats, you first need to know what is your asset. And that's why those who have been into the security industry inventorize the asset. Because unless you know what is the asset, what is it that you are trying to protect, you can't protect it because you cannot identify the threats to this particular asset, right? And that's why identification of asset is a very, very important component of overall security management posture, right? So once you've identified what you are going to protect, right? You have identified what you're going to protect, you are going to identify threats. Now, this threat identification can be modeled using certain techniques. Okay. You can model this threats based on three basic characters in the information domain. First is you can have threat assessment focused on assets. That's why we said asset inventorizing. So then what we'll do in focusing on asset is you'll keep the asset in the center and try to analyze what are the threats, right? So this will be called focused on assets. Then next is focused on attackers. Okay. You have a particular piece of asset and there are certain techniques by which a attacker will try to, affect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of this asset. So this will be threat one. Threat one will have its own way of causing an effect on the CIA. Threat two might have a different way of, carrying out a attack on the asset. Just to give you a simple example, suppose you have a website, right? Okay, and your website takes username and password. One of the attackers is interested in doing a privilege escalation. So his techniques of getting username and password from the backend will be different. Another attacker doing the same attack of trying to find out username and password might do a brute force. Plus social engineering. Social engineering to find out the username, brute force to probably find the password. And another attacker might just want to do a DDoS attack. So there is one threat, but the actor carries out a attack in a different manner. When you're trying to assess how the attacker is carrying out an attack, that is called focused on attackers. Okay. Very well known methods are kill chain, MIT RE framework, right? These are focused on attackers, right? Focused on assets are asset valuation techniques. Asset valuation techniques, right? And then finally, since we are in information and the hardware and the software age, the final is focused on software. So how do you do threat modeling based on software? You keep a piece of software. Now, that software could be a website. That software could be a mobile application. That software could be a desktop application. You keep the software, and well-known attack techniques, and you find how those threats can materialize. Right. One of the most common technique for analyzing software threats is the STRIDE model. Okay, the STRIDE model was developed by Microsoft. S stands for spoofing. T stands for what was T stands for? T stands for tampering. Tampering of data, right? R stands for repudiation. I stands for information disclosure. And E stands for escalation of privilege, right? So basically, if you have an application and you're trying to spoof, right, user identity, then it will be a spoofing attack. Then you try to tamper. Tamper with what? What kind of information has been passed between, the application and the user? If you can tamper it, then there is a threat. Then there are repudiation threat. Somebody carries out something and then say, I did not carry out. So that would be repudiation threat. Then you have information disclosure. You're somewhere able to hack and go into the backend and retrieve information from their database. That would lead to information disclosure. I missed out on D. D is denial of service, which affects the availability of information. So I carry out a DDoS attack or a denial of service attack and make the application, unavailable. And finally is the elevation of privilege, that if I've been able to hack inside the system, then I will go and escalate my privileges to extract more data. Okay. STRIDE is important, generally direct questions from STRIDE will come, or you might be given a small scenario where it will be shown that it is spoofing and you have to identify whether it's a spoofing or it's a elevation of privilege or denial of service, right? So we saw STRIDE. The second model is PASTA. Okay. So PASTA is a process for attack simulation and threat analysis. Okay. Don't have to note down anything. It's straight from Cybex, right? I'm just trying to explain. So it's a 7-stage process to carry out threat analysis. Okay. Again, it's focused on software, right? So these are two very common techniques where software is concerned. You also have a technique called VAST, visually agile, simple threat, right? So VAST is a agile based security threat modeling focused for softwares. Okay. You can also do threat modeling using diagramming. Okay. If you look at softwares, okay, uh, you can say it's a website, right? It's a web application. So what is the first step in web application? There is a user flow. What does the user give? User gives username and password. Then what happens? The application, sends the username and password hash to the middleware of the application, where it is accepted by some middle layer. Okay. Then it carries out certain actions with the database, right? So then the information again flows here, then it goes here, and then again user gives certain data, and then certain things happen, right? This is how generally web applications work. Now if you see, you can clearly draw, you can clearly diagram the layers where there is a information exchange happen, right? And you can interpret data flow from each phase. Once you do such reduction, you can apply controls at machine level, at user level, at communication level, at different layers. So it's always a good strategy to break down your software into uh, into parts of the data flow. Such kind of technique is called reduction analysis. Questions might be there, such kind of a diagram will be there, and you will be told, okay, what is this kind of a technique? So it may not be a direct question, maybe certain portion asked where you will be analyzed that do you understand what is the reduction analysis. So reduction analysis is breaking a big problem into small problems and then trying to find out where to apply a control. Right. So once you do this threat modeling, what is the end result of threat modeling? The end result of any threat modeling will be basically threats. Threat 1, you'll have n number of threats. So now, once you've got the threats, you have the threat library, right? Now the next task is to prioritize them. Because if you won't prioritize your threat, you will not come to know that what is the inter se importance of threat. So next step is to prioritize the threat. Once you have prioritized the threat, then you need to know how to respond to that threat. If it's a denial of service attack, you will probably put rate limiting. If it's a privilege escalation, you might put multi-factor authentication. So depending upon what are the threats, you prioritize and respond to this threat. One of the most common framework for prioritizing threats is called the DREAD technique. Okay. How do you prioritize threat? Using the DREAD threat technique, or you can use a risk matrix or a threat matrix. Okay. So you basically create a matrix, 3x3 matrix, and do high, you can say this is high, this is medium, this is low. Okay. And then you can say this is low, this is medium, this is high. And then you put each category as to what is its, inter-se value, right? Or you can create a system which is well defined, which is called the DREAD. Okay. So what is DREAD is? DREAD is DREAD. Okay. So you have threat. What is the damage potential of a threat? That means if that threat realizes, what is the damage it is going to cause? Next is reproducibility. How easy it is to reproduce the attack. Okay. Is it very easily denial of service attack can be carried out easily. That means it's very easily reproducible. Exploitability, right? How difficult it is to perform the attack. Escalation of privilege is a difficult attack. You have to deliver a malware, you have to do, process violations, and then, you might be able to do a escalation attack. But it is difficult to perform. There are chances that you will get detected. So it is difficult. So exploitability, how exploitable it is. Okay. Then next is affected users. That means if the attack realizes how many users are going to be affected. A denial of service attack can affect a lot of users, whereas a privilege escalation attack might affect a single user or one or two users, right? And finally is discoverability. How easy or difficult it is to, how easy or difficult is it for attacker to find that vulnerability in your system? Okay? Is for attacker to execute this attack, is it very easy? Is it very difficult? Okay. So, and can it easily discover the weakness in your system? So by these, you can carry out a threat prioritization. Once you have done this threat prioritization, the end result is you will have a matrix or a table wherein you have threat 1, threat 2, threat 3, threat 4, threat 5, its dread value or its risk matrix value. So you can say dread value is 9 or 10 or 1 or 2. What happens is you are able to prioritize the threats. Once you have prioritized the threat, you will see that in the next phase, when you do risk assessment, you will find that your risk also you can do inter se prioritization. Okay. So with that, we come to end of today's session.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe our channel.